What if one small act of kindness could change your life forever? Years ago, a struggling single dad gave his only jacket to a shivering young woman at a snow-covered airfield. He never asked for her name, never expected to see her again. But life and kindness have a way of circling back when you least expect it. Today's story is one of quiet heroes, second chances, and the kind of love that grows not from grand gestures, but from quiet, unwavering presence. If stories like this speak to your heart, consider subscribing to our channel. We share human stories that heal, inspire, and remind us what truly matters. Now settle in. You won't want to miss what happens when a man who once gave everything is finally given something back. This is Wings of a Promise. A struggling single dad lent his jacket to a shivering girl. Years later, she returned in a jet. The snow came early that year. It was only mid-November, but the winds howling across the Montana plains carried with them a cruel bite, sharp and unforgiving, the kind of cold that settled into your bones and didn't let go until spring. Ethan Cole shoved his gloved hands deeper into the pockets of his weather-worn jacket as he crossed the tarmac, boots crunching on the frozen ground. He had just finished repairing a faulty fuel line on an old Cessna 172, the kind of job that paid just enough to keep the lights on in his little house off Ridgeway Road. His toolbox clanked at his side as he approached the hangar, the golden glow from its single lamp casting long shadows across the otherwise darkened airstrip. "Dad!" a small voice called from inside. Ethan turned, smiling despite the cold. His 10-year-old son, Noah, popped his head out of the hangar door, bundled in an oversized coat and knit beanie. "You said just 1 hour," Noah reminded him, holding up a flashlight like a tiny lighthouse keeper. "It's been almost 2. Ethan sighed, brushing snow from his shoulders. "I know, bud. Sorry. The fuel line was worse than I thought. You hungry?" "Starving." "Well then," he said, tousling Noah's hair, "let's get you some dinner." But before they could retreat to their beat-up Ford parked nearby, Ethan noticed something. A silhouette, barely visible through the swirling snow, standing motionless near the edge of the airfield. His first instinct was concern. People didn't wander onto a rural airstrip in the middle of a snowstorm unless something was wrong. "Wait here," he told Noah, setting the toolbox down. As he drew closer, the figure came into focus. A girl, maybe early 20s, wrapped in a cocktail dress entirely unsuited for the weather. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her legs bare and trembling, high heels half sunken into the icy gravel. Her hair was wind-whipped, her face pale. "Hey!" Ethan called out, slowing his approach so as not to startle her. "Are you okay?" The girl blinked at him, startled. I didn't mean to trespass. I was just trying to—" Her teeth chattered. She didn't finish the sentence. "Let's get you inside," Ethan said, unzipping his jacket without hesitation and draping it over her narrow shoulders. "You'll freeze to death out here." "I'm fine," she said quickly, though her lips were blue. "Really, I'll go." He looked at her, then at the dark stretch of road behind her. No car, no luggage, just footprints in the snow. "Where's your ride?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "I missed it." Ethan didn't press further. He recognized the look in her eyes, that mix of fear, pride, and shame. He'd seen it in the mirror once, the night he'd signed the divorce papers and realized he had no plan, no savings, and a 3-year-old to raise. "Come on," he said. "There's a heater in the hangar. You can warm up while I make a few calls." The girl paused, then nodded. "Okay." Noah looked up as they entered, surprised. "Who's that?" "This is a traveler," Ethan said, glancing at the girl. She looked around nervously but said nothing. "I'm Noah," his son said brightly. "Do you like grilled cheese?" A small smile tugged at the corners of the girl's mouth. "I do." "Then you're lucky," Ethan said, moving toward the tiny kitchenette. "I make a mean grilled cheese." As the snow piled up outside, the 3 of them huddled inside the warmth of the hangar. Ethan made sandwiches. Noah brought out a thermos of cocoa. The girl, who still hadn't given her name, sat wrapped in Ethan's jacket, hands cupped around a steaming mug. Her eyes followed father and son quietly, as if she wasn't quite sure if any of this was real. "You don't have to tell me anything," Ethan finally said, his voice low and kind. "But if you need help, there's no judgment here." The girl looked at him, startled again. Not by his words, but by the tone. Gentle, respectful. Like she wasn't a problem to be solved, but a person who mattered. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. "And when I saw the hangar light, I thought, maybe it was open." "It was," Ethan said simply, "and I'm glad you came." They stayed until the storm quieted. When Ethan stepped out to check the skies, she slipped out quietly, leaving behind nothing but a faint trace of perfume and his jacket, carefully folded on the chair. She never gave her name. She never said goodbye. And Ethan never expected to see her again. But sometimes the smallest acts of kindness are seeds, planted in the dead of winter, quietly growing in places you'll never think to look. The snow melted, seasons turned, and the girl from the storm became a memory that visited Ethan less and less. It wasn't that he forgot her. Far from it. He still had the jacket, after all. Folded neatly in the back of his closet, the lining faintly scented like wind in winter. He kept it not for sentiment, he told himself, but because it was too worn to give away, too thin for true warmth. Truthfully, he kept it because that night reminded him of something he feared he was slowly losing: his capacity to make a difference. Years passed and life settled into a rhythm that was equal parts comforting and exhausting. Every morning, Ethan woke at 5:30 a.m., made coffee in a cracked ceramic pot, packed a modest lunch for Noah, and warmed up the truck that groaned like an old man in the cold. He dropped Noah off at the small-town elementary school, where the teachers still knew every kid by name, then head to the dusty hangar near the edge of the airfield. There, among dented toolboxes and aging engines, he repaired life's leftovers: crop dusters, hobbyist planes, and occasionally an old helicopter that hadn't flown since Reagan was in office. Business wasn't great, but it was steady. Ethan never overcharged, never took shortcuts, and never turned away someone who couldn't quite afford a full repair. Most people in town respected that, even if it didn't make him rich. In the evenings, he and Noah would sit on the worn leather couch, watching old adventure movies or working on science fair projects that always involved flight in some form. Paper wings, bottle rockets, solar-powered gliders. Noah was obsessed with flying, and Ethan both encouraged it and feared it. He knew the allure, knew what it felt like to be above the clouds, untethered from the world, but he also knew how fast you could fall. Once, Ethan had flown helicopters for the National Guard. Medevac missions mostly, the kind where you didn't get to choose how bad the day would be. That life had ended after Noah's mother left. She hadn't wanted a husband who was always gone, or a child she never planned for. One day, she just stopped returning texts, and by the time Ethan tracked her down, she'd filed custody relinquishment papers. It had been just the two of them ever since. He didn't talk much about the military anymore, not because it brought pain, but because it felt like a life that belonged to someone else, someone stronger, someone freer. These days, his world was smaller, grounded by grease stains, grocery bills, and goodnight stories. Still, there were moments that shimmered, like when Noah would randomly grab his hand in the middle of the grocery store, or when the boy tried to mimic his serious mechanic face and failed miserably. That was the magic, Ethan thought, not in grand gestures or sweeping romance. It was in grilled cheese dinners, Sunday morning pancakes, and the quiet comfort of knowing your child felt safe enough to fall asleep in the car. One such Sunday, while they were fixing a broken garden gate, Noah asked, "Do you think I'll ever fly a real plane, like the ones in the movies?" Ethan paused mid-swing with his hammer. "I think if anyone could, it'd be you," he said, nudging Noah's baseball cap. "But flying's not about how high you go. It's about how steady you land." Noah blinked. "Is that what you used to do? Land steady?" Ethan gave a quiet chuckle. "Some days better than others." They never talked about his past much. Noah didn't ask why his mother wasn't around. He didn't ask why they never flew anywhere, or why the mailbox often held bills marked in red. He just accepted the life they had, and in doing so, made it bearable. Still, there were nights Ethan lay awake, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, wondering if this was all he could offer. He'd done everything right, worked hard, loved his son with everything he had, yet the road ahead looked just as narrow as the one behind. He wasn't bitter, just tired. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between an auto parts catalog and a coupon booklet. At first glance, it looked like junk mail. Cream-colored envelope, no return address. But inside was a single page, hand-signed. The local council was considering selling off portions of the old airfield, including the hangar Ethan rented. Developers wanted to turn the land into a storage facility. Unless Ethan could buy the lot outright, he'd have 60 days to vacate. He read the letter 3 times. Buy the lot? With what? His savings amounted to barely enough to cover rent and groceries for the month. The thought of relocating the hangar, the tools, the business, it was unthinkable. Noah noticed the look on his face that night and asked, "Are we moving?" Ethan shook his head too quickly. No, nothing like that. But something had shifted. The place he'd built, humble as it was being chipped away. The life he'd tried so hard to anchor for Noah was cracking at the edges. He stared out at the empty airfield, snow now long gone. The horizon stretched wide and uncertain. In his gut, he felt the stirrings of a storm. Not one made of snow or wind, but of change. It was a Thursday afternoon in early spring when the sky broke its silence. Ethan had been elbow deep in the innards of a twin-engine Piper Seneca, sweat beating at his temple despite the mild air. The hangar smelled like hot metal and old grease. He barely noticed the distant hum at first, until it grew louder, sharper, like something slicing through the clouds with purpose. He stood upright slowly, squinting into the sunlight. A jet, not just any jet. It was sleek, long-nosed, silver and white with a deep navy stripe that shimmered like water. The roar of its descent filled the air, vibrating against the corrugated metal walls of the hangar. The runway, dusty and cracked in places, hadn't seen a plane of that caliber in years. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag, stunned. Corporate jets didn't land here. The only traffic this place got these days were hobby pilots, crop dusters, and the occasional emergency landing during weather diversions. No one with a plane like that chose to stop in rural Montana without a damn good reason. The jet touched down with surgical precision, kicking up a loose cloud of gravel and dust. The hangar's old phone rang just as Ethan stepped outside, but he didn't bother answering it. Instead, he jogged toward the edge of the airstrip as the aircraft taxied slowly to a halt. By the time he reached it, the cabin door had already lowered. Out stepped a man first, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a suit so pressed it practically announced his paycheck. He glanced around the empty landscape with practiced detachment, then stepped aside, and then she appeared. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. She descended the stairs with a grace that didn't quite belong to the dust-blown airstrip. Dark hair tucked into a simple bun, slim trousers and a cream blouse under a tailored blazer. Sunglasses, large enough to veil half her face, did little to hide the sharpness of her jawline or the poise in her step. He couldn't place her, but something pulled at him, a tickle at the back of his mind, a ghost brushing the edge of memory. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, falling into his usual tone. Polite, firm, helpful, but reserved. The woman turned toward him, removing her sunglasses slowly. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the ground beneath his feet felt just slightly unfamiliar. Her eyes were darker now, steadier, but he'd seen them before. Not here, not like this. In the dead of winter, years ago, wrapped in wind and fear and shadows. "I'm looking for Ethan Cole," she said. Her voice was low, deliberate. It carried the weight of someone used to being heard. "That'd be me." She smiled then, just slightly. "I was told you're the best mechanic this side of the Mississippi." He blinked. "I'm the only mechanic this side of the Mississippi." She chuckled, a light melodic sound that didn't quite fit the tension in the air. "Even better." He stood motionless for a beat, then nodded toward the hangar. "If your plane needs work, I'll have to run diagnostics. Looks like she came in clean, though." "She's fine," the suited man interjected. "We just needed to make a quick landing. Nothing urgent." The woman held up a hand to him. "Thank you, Jason. I'll speak with Mr. Cole privately." Jason hesitated, then gave a short nod and stepped back onto the jet. As the engines cooled, the silence around them felt loud. Ethan folded his arms, trying to read the woman's face. "Mind telling me why you're really here?" She glanced toward the horizon, where the mountains framed the sky like a painting, and then looked back at him. You once gave a stranger your jacket on a night she might not have survived, she said softly. Ethan stared at her. I told you I was fine, she continued, and you didn't push. You brought me in. You made grilled cheese sandwiches. You let me be invisible, just long enough to feel like a person again. Ethan's throat tightened. You? I never forgot, she said, stepping closer. Not for a single day. He studied her face, the line of her cheek, the curve of her lips, and slowly, painfully, the years folded in on themselves. She wasn't a girl anymore. She was something else entirely now. Older, yes, but also clearer, bolder. You disappeared, he said, his voice quieter than he intended. I had to, she replied. I was still running then, from everything, including myself. He looked away for a moment, his hands flexing slightly. And now? He asked. Now, she said. I'm no longer running, and I came back because I want to know what became of the man who gave everything and expected nothing. Ethan swallowed hard. I'm still here, fixing engines, raising my son, trying to make ends meet. A warm breeze kicked up some dust between them. She stepped closer still. I know this is sudden, but I'd like to stay a while. Help if you'll let me. He furrowed his brow. Help how? A pause, then. My name is Isabelle Delacroix. It landed like a stone in the stillness. Ethan's mind raced. Delacroix, aviation. He remembered seeing the name on glossy magazines in the waiting room at the dentist's office. A billion-dollar aviation conglomerate. Private jets, commercial fleets, international hubs, and the woman in front of him, the girl from the storm, owned it. She watched the realization spread across his face, then added gently, I don't want to disrupt your life. I only want to return something I owe. He looked down at his hands, still stained with engine oil, still holding the weight of years spent surviving. You don't owe me anything, he murmured. She smiled. Then let's call it a beginning. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting amber light across the open plains, when Ethan stepped back into the hangar, with Isabelle trailing just behind him. She paused at the threshold, her gaze sweeping over the place. The rusted metal shelves, the pegboard of mismatched tools, the scent of oil and old pine. Nothing had changed, and somehow that undid her more than if everything had. I can't believe this place still smells the same, she said quietly. Ethan arched a brow. You remember the smell? She gave a small smile, brushing her fingers along the workbench edge. I remember a lot of things. The hum of that old space heater, the way you sliced grilled cheese sandwiches diagonally, like it mattered. He blinked. It does matter. Triangles melt better in your mouth. A soft laugh escaped her, genuine and short-lived, like a sound she hadn't made in years. But it settled between them, drawing the past closer. Noah looked up from the back corner where he was assembling a small model helicopter. His brow furrowed at the sight of the elegantly dressed woman stepping inside like she belonged. Hi, he said cautiously. Isabelle knelt to his level, offering a warm smile. You must be Noah. He nodded slowly. Do I know you? No, she replied gently. But I know your dad. He once made the best grilled cheese I've ever had. Noah grinned at that. He still makes that every Friday. I'm glad some things haven't changed, she said softly, standing back up. Ethan cleared his throat. So, what exactly are you doing here, Isabelle? Not just passing through. She walked over to the window, folding her arms as she looked out at the dusty runway. I was in Denver on business when I saw a map. This place was marked in the back of my mind for years, like a pin with no label. I knew one day I'd come back, I just didn't expect it to feel like this. Ethan leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. Like what? Like a story I didn't finish, she said, turning to face him. And maybe it's foolish, but I wanted to see if you were real. If that night, your kindness, was just a moment or part of who you are. He shrugged. I help people. That's not a big deal. It was to me. She said it without hesitation. No grandeur, no dramatics, just the kind of raw honesty that makes a man pause. There was a silence between them. Not awkward, but full of unasked questions and memories neither had ever truly unpacked. Then her eyes fell on the coat, still hanging on the hook by the door. Weathered, familiar. It looked almost out of place now, like a relic. She walked over slowly, running her fingers across the collar. "You kept it," she murmured. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Didn't seem right to throw it away. "I remember how it smelled that night, like metal and soap and hope." Her voice trembled at the end, though she quickly masked it. "I was cold, starving, and too proud to ask for help. You gave it anyway." "I didn't think twice," he replied. "That's the part I've never forgotten." She turned to face him fully now, more open than she'd been since stepping off the jet. "I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." What would it take?" she said, her voice calm but edged with something fierce beneath. "To get you to work for me?" Ethan blinked. "What?" "I want you to come with me. Work on my aircraft team. I'm building something bigger. A fleet for humanitarian use. Private but purpose-driven. I need people I trust. People with steady hands and good hearts." He let out a dry laugh. "That's a generous compliment, but I'm not your guy." "Why not?" He gestured around. "Because I have a life here. A son. A routine. Because I fix things with duct tape and faith, not corporate budgets." Isabel took a step closer. "That's exactly why you are the guy. I don't need another engineer with a resume full of acronyms. I need someone who won't look at a girl in a snowstorm and walk away." He looked at her, really looked, and saw not just the billionaire woman or the memory of a girl in heels shivering in moonlight, but someone who had earned every inch of the distance between then and now. Still, he shook his head. "I'm not built for your world, Isabel." She didn't argue, not with words. Instead, she looked around once more, her expression softening. Then, without a word, she walked back to the coat, took it off the hook, folded it neatly, and set it on the workbench. "I'll be in town a few days," she said. "Think about it." As she turned to leave, Noah called out, "Do you still like grilled cheese?" Isabel paused at the door, smiled back over her shoulder. "Always." And then she was gone, the door creaking closed behind her. Ethan stood in the silence that followed, hands at his sides, jaw clenched with something he couldn't name. His eyes fell again on the folded jacket, and for the first time in years, it didn't look like a memory. It looked like a question. The next day dawned with gray skies and the threat of rain. Ethan stood beneath the hangar's wide awning, watching storm clouds creep low over the hills. The air was thick, electric, the kind of weather that made you restless without knowing why. He had barely slept. Isabel's return had unsettled something in him, not just the memory of that long-ago night, but a deeper ache, the kind that whispered, "What if your life could still change? What if you're allowed more than just surviving?" He didn't like the whisper. He didn't trust it. "Dad?" Noah's voice pulled him back. Ethan turned. The boy stood behind him in his school hoodie, backpack slung lazily over one shoulder, a half-eaten granola bar in his hand. "You okay?" Noah asked, squinting up at the clouds. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "Just watching the weather." "She coming back today?" the boy asked, not looking at him. "Who?" Noah grinned. "The lady with the jet." Ethan chuckled despite himself. "Probably. She said she'd be in town a few days." Noah looked thoughtful for a moment, then asked, "Did you like her? From before, I mean." Ethan paused. "I didn't know her. But you remember her?" He nodded. "Yeah, I remember she looked cold and lost." "She doesn't look lost now." Ethan studied his son for a moment. Noah wasn't probing. He was just curious. Honest and open in a way adults forget how to be. "She's not the same person anymore," Ethan said softly. "Neither am I," he didn't add. Later that afternoon, as the clouds finally split open and rain began to fall in earnest, Isabel returned, but not in her sleek jet. She arrived alone in a rented SUV that looked comically out of place on the narrow gravel road leading to the hangar. Ethan met her at the door, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. "Didn't expect you in a Ford," he said. She offered a wry smile. "I try not to make a habit of descending from the sky every time I want to talk." "Progress," he muttered, stepping aside so she could enter. She wore a deep green raincoat over jeans and boots. Simple, practical. Yet she carried herself with the same quiet certainty that unsettled him more than any storm outside. They stood in silence for a moment before she spoke. I didn't come here to recruit you, she said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Well, not just to recruit you, she amended. I came because I owe you more than a job offer. He said nothing. I was 22, she began, fresh out of a halfway house, still terrified of mirrors. I'd spent my teenage years bouncing between foster homes and shelters, always one misstep away from disappearing completely. Ethan felt his chest tighten. That night, she continued, I'd just run from a party I wasn't invited to, one of those charity galas where rich people pretend to care. I'd snuck in, hoping to find someone, anyone, who remembered me, but no one did. Her voice grew quieter. I didn't have a coat. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. And I remember thinking that if I collapsed on that airfield, no one would find me until spring. Ethan swallowed hard, hands tightening around the rag he didn't realize he'd been holding. And then you appeared, she said. A stranger with kind eyes and a jacket that smelled like soap and rust. You didn't ask questions. You didn't look at me like I was broken. You just saw me. He couldn't meet her gaze. The weight of it was too much. I left before you woke up, she admitted. I was ashamed. I didn't know how to say thank you, or sorry, or please help me. But that night changed me. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small worn notebook. The edges were frayed, the cover faded. She handed it to him. Ethan opened it slowly. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, journal entries, scattered thoughts, memories scrawled in neat but hurried script. Near the middle, one passage stood out, circled in red ink. The man in the hangar gave me warmth without asking my name. I will build a life that one day honors that gift. He looked up at her. I carried that promise for years, she said. It got me through school, through internships, through every boardroom full of people who said I didn't belong. I built Delacroix Aviation not because I wanted power, but because I wanted to fly above the version of myself that was too small, too scared. The rain beat harder on the tin roof like applause from the sky. I don't expect you to say yes to anything, she added, but I needed you to know the truth, that your kindness wasn't wasted, that it changed someone. Forever. Ethan closed the notebook slowly. His throat felt thick. His voice, when it came, was low. I didn't do anything special. You did something rare, she said. They stood there suspended in the echo of old wounds and new possibilities. After a while, Ethan gestured toward the back of the hangar. I've got some cocoa left, he said gruffly. Isabel smiled. Triangles, right? He chuckled. Always. As he prepared cocoa and grilled cheese, habits that never really left, he caught her watching him. Not with pity, not with romantic idealism, but with gratitude, and something else he hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. The storm passed sometime after midnight, leaving the world washed and quiet. By morning, the sky was a brilliant, reckless blue, the kind that made the Montana plains stretch wider, made possibilities feel a little less like wishful thinking. Ethan stood outside the hangar with a mug of coffee cupped between his hands. The air smelled of wet earth and spring. It was one of those rare moments when everything felt still, almost sacred, peaceful, and yet his mind churned. He couldn't stop replaying Isabel's words from the night before. The journal, the memories, the way her voice had caught when she said, it changed someone, forever. He wasn't used to being someone's turning point. He didn't feel like someone capable of changing lives. He glanced across the field where Noah was kicking a deflated soccer ball, using the sloped edge of the runway as a goal. The kid didn't have cleats. His jeans were too short again. But his laugh rang out clear and untroubled. And wasn't that the point? Keeping life simple, safe, grounded? Good morning, came Isabel's voice from behind him. Ethan turned to find her walking up the path, not from a car this time, but on foot. Hair pulled back, sleeves rolled, hands in her coat pockets. She looked relaxed, unpolished, like she belonged here somehow. Morning, he said, offering a slight nod. I brought muffins. She held up a paper bag. Bribery, in case you were still thinking of telling me to get lost. He smirked. I'm still considering it. Fair, she said, smiling as she joined him near the workbench. They sat on opposite ends of the bench in silence for a few moments, sipping coffee and watching Noah. The boy shouted something about extra time and booted the soccer ball at a tire rim, narrowly missing. "He's a good kid," Isabel said. "He's the best thing I've ever done," Ethan replied without hesitation. She looked at him, quietly thoughtful. "You've done a lot of good, Ethan. Probably more than you give yourself credit for." He shook his head. "I'm just trying to make rent and keep him fed. I'm not out here changing the world." "Maybe not the whole world," she said softly. "But mine, yes." He didn't respond. Instead, he looked back out toward the open field, jaw clenched against a rising discomfort he couldn't quite name. Finally, Isabel stood, brushing crumbs from her jeans. "I should be honest with you. I'd prefer it," he said. "My team's expanding," she began. "Not the commercial side, the philanthropic division. We're building a fleet of smaller jets designed for medical transport, crisis response, resource delivery. Think flying hospitals, emergency relief in places no one else will go." Ethan blinked. "And you want me to, what? Consult?" "I want you to lead, Ethan. Oversee maintenance, help recruit and train a new generation of aviation engineers, mechanics who don't come from Ivy League programs or corporate culture, but from real life. People like you." He stared at her, stunned. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." He stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "Isabel, I appreciate the offer, but, she prompted gently. He looked at her, a mix of disbelief and frustration in his eyes. "I'm not the guy you think I am," he said. "I fix planes in a hangar with holes in the roof. I buy used parts and haggle with suppliers to stretch every dollar. I've never managed a fleet or trained a team. I don't even have a college degree." "You have something better," she said, stepping toward him. "You have instinct and grit and a way of seeing problems before they become catastrophes. You taught yourself how to keep things flying long after they should have fallen apart. That's leadership, Ethan. That's vision." He looked down at his boots, suddenly feeling the weight of every crack in the soles. "And what about Noah?" he asked, voice tight. "I can't just uproot his life. He's got school, friends, routine. I've spent 10 years building stability for that boy." "We wouldn't uproot him," Isabel said softly. "The program's based in Bozeman, less than 2 hours from here. We'd set you up with housing, help with schooling. It wouldn't be some distant, sterile corporate thing. It would be yours, as much as mine." He shook his head again, slower this time. "I've spent so long just surviving," he said. "I don't know how to do more than that." Isabel didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small. A patch. Worn, embroidered, and unmistakably military. Ethan's breath caught when he saw it. "That night," she said quietly, "after I left your hangar, I found this in the jacket pocket. I didn't know what it meant at the time. But later I researched, found your name, learned you were a medevac pilot, that you used to fly into chaos to pull people out." He swallowed hard. "I realized something," she said. "You didn't stop being that man. You just stopped believing you were." She set the patch gently on the bench between them. "I'm not here to pull you out, Ethan," she said, meeting his eyes. "I'm just offering a way back in, if you want it." And with that, she turned and walked away. Ethan stared at the patch, the faded emblem of his former life, and felt 1,000 memories press in on him at once. Engines roaring, radio static, the weight of life in his hands. He didn't know if he could go back, but maybe, just maybe, he could go forward. The morning sky was painted in delicate pastels, soft strokes of pink and gold bleeding into one another like watercolors on cotton paper. The storm had cleared completely, leaving behind a hush over the airstrip that felt almost reverent. Noah sat cross-legged on the hangar floor, tinkering with a half-built glider model, tongue poking out in concentration. Ethan watched him from a few feet away, leaning against the open hangar door, still gripping the military patch Isabel had returned the night before. It hadn't left his hand since. He turned it over slowly. The frayed edges, the faded stitching, the ghost of a name that still felt too large for the life he now lived. "Dad?" Noah's voice broke into his thoughts. "Do you remember what it feels like to fly?" Ethan blinked. He hadn't talked about flying in years. Hadn't let himself. "I do," he said after a beat. "Why?" Noah shrugged. "I was just thinking, You always look different when you talk about it, like you're still up there, even if your feet are on the ground. Ethan offered a quiet smile. It's not about the height, it's about the silence, the stillness. For a few minutes, everything else falls away. Noah looked at him thoughtfully. Do you miss it? Ethan hesitated. Every day. The boy went back to his glider, and Ethan turned his eyes back to the sky. He hadn't noticed Isabel arrive. She came quietly, walking this time, with that same gentle presence that seemed to echo more than announce itself. I brought a surprise, she said, holding up a small case. What is it? Noah asked, jumping to his feet. Isabel opened the case to reveal two aviation headsets. I figured if I can't convince your dad to take a leap, she said with a wink, maybe I can get the co-pilot on board. Noah's eyes widened. Wait, are we flying? If it's okay with your dad. Ethan looked from the headsets to his son's eager face, his gut twisted, part fear, part awe. There was a time when he wouldn't have hesitated to take Noah into the skies, but life had a way of weighing a man down, reminding him of what could go wrong instead of what might go right. Just a short ride, Isabel added gently. 10 minutes, around the valley. Noah turned to him, eyes shining. Please? Ethan paused, then nodded. The boy whooped, grabbing one of the headsets like it was a golden ticket. Isabel gave Ethan a reassuring glance. No pressure, just invitation, and walked with Noah toward the small two-seater plane she had prepped earlier that morning. Ethan followed, silently checking the tires, the wing flaps, the fuel levels, old habits kicking in. The aircraft was in pristine condition, sleek and compact. He ran his hand across the fuselage, nodding in quiet approval. You still trust your instincts, Isabel said, strapping herself in. That's a good sign. Noah climbed in beside her, practically vibrating with excitement. Ethan helped buckle him in, then crouched beside the cockpit. You okay? He asked. Are you kidding? Noah grinned. This is awesome. Ethan ruffled his hair, heart thudding. All right, keep your hands off the controls unless she says otherwise. Yes, sir. He stood back, hands on his hips, and watched as the propeller spun to life. The engine purred, smooth and confident. Isabel taxied the plane toward the edge of the runway, gave Ethan a small wave through the windshield, and then they were off. Ethan stood frozen as the plane rolled, gained speed, and lifted off with the grace of a bird taking flight. It rose steadily, circling wide above the valley. For a moment, it looked like a toy against the vast Montana sky, a quiet silhouette gliding through gold and blue. He didn't realize he was holding his breath until the plane turned and arced low over the hangar, dipping its wings slightly as if to say, You see this? You made this possible. 10 minutes later, they touched down smooth as silk. Noah stumbled out first, cheeks flushed with adrenaline and joy. Dad, that was insane. She let me hold the yoke for a second. I mean, not really steer, but she showed me everything. Ethan laughed, some of the tension in his chest finally breaking. You okay? Isabel asked him, stepping out. He nodded. You made his year. She smiled. Good, because you made mine a long time ago. He looked at her then, really looked, and something inside him softened. They walked back toward the hangar together, Noah trailing behind, narrating every second of the flight to himself like a play-by-play announcer. You know, Isabel said gently, he believes you can do anything. Ethan sighed. He doesn't know the weight of failure yet, but he knows the power of presence, she replied, and that's more than most kids ever get. They reached the workbench where the glider model lay waiting. Isabel ran her fingers along the wooden frame. Do you remember what it felt like the first time you flew? She asked. Ethan's eyes went distant. Yeah, I was 17. My instructor said I gripped the stick so tight I nearly snapped it in half. What changed? I let go. She nodded slowly. Maybe it's time to do that again. He didn't answer. Not yet. But he didn't walk away either. Later that evening, as he tucked Noah into bed, the boy looked up at him sleepily. Dad? Yeah? Do you think flying is kind of like being close to God? Ethan blinked. Why do you ask? Because up there, everything feels possible. Ethan brushed a hand over Noah's hair and kissed his forehead. Yeah, kid, he whispered. It does. The news spread the way small-town gossip always did. Quiet at first, like smoke curling under a door, until suddenly it was everywhere. Someone had seen the jet. Then someone else saw Isabel driving the rental SUV up and down the gravel roads near the Cole property. And by the time she made the mistake of walking into Dottie's diner for a black coffee and a slice of pie, every pair of eyes turned like sunflowers following light. Ethan had warned her, gently, that small towns had long memories and short patience. But even he hadn't expected the sheer volume of speculation. The whispers weren't cruel, at first. They were curious, nervous, and always punctuated with a shrug that said, "Who are we to judge?" But then came the murmurs. "She's a billionaire. What's she doing hanging around a single dad? Thinks she's buying the hangar? Maybe she's here for charity, or maybe he's just lucky." Some of it made its way to Ethan in indirect ways. At the hardware store, in line at the gas station, through half smiles and lingering glances that asked questions they never had the courage to say aloud. But the worst was when Noah heard it. They were leaving the grocery store, arms full of paper bags, when the boy looked up and said, "Someone at school said you're going to marry a rich lady and leave." Ethan stopped short. The air around them was still, heavy with unspoken worry. "What?" Noah kicked a pebble down the sidewalk. "They said you were just fixing her plane so you could move into a mansion and forget about us." Ethan set the bags down and knelt beside him, eyes soft. "Hey, first of all, there's no mansion. Second, there's no leaving. You and me, we're a team. That's not changing." Noah nodded slowly, but his shoulders stayed tense. Later that night, Ethan found himself pacing the hangar, the old patch still in his back pocket. He ran his hand over the worn frame of the Piper's wing, as if the metal could give him answers. Isabel arrived just before dusk. She didn't park this time. She walked, coat drawn tight against the wind, her steps slower than usual. Ethan turned as she entered, sensing the shift in her. "You heard," he said. She gave a small nod. "It's not the first time people have talked behind my back. It probably won't be the last." He studied her, frowning. "But it bothers you." She hesitated. "Not for me. For you. For Noah. I don't want to cause problems in a life that already works." He laughed, not cruelly but tiredly. "It barely works, Isabel." "But it's yours," she said. "You built it, and I don't want to be the reason it cracks." Ethan leaned back against the workbench, arms crossed. "So what? You gonna vanish again?" She looked up, wounded. "That's not fair." "Is it?" Silence stretched between them. "I'm not ashamed of what we shared," she said finally. "That night changed me, and so has this week. But if I stay too long, they'll turn your story into mine. You'll become the guy she helped instead of the man who helped me." Ethan exhaled slowly. The wind outside had picked up, rustling the loose tin on the roof. "I didn't ask for attention," he said. "I know. And I didn't ask you to come back." She flinched at that, but said nothing. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I'm sorry, that came out wrong." "I get it," she said. "You're proud." "Damn right I am," he muttered. "I've scraped and clawed to give Noah something steady. I've said no to better jobs, easier paths, because I wanted him to grow up knowing who he was, not who people thought he should be." "I respect that," she said gently. Ethan looked at her, jaw clenched. "But you walk in with a jet and promises and ideas I can't even picture. And now the town thinks I'm being bought." Her voice was quiet but firm. "Are you?" His eyes locked on hers. "No," he said. "Then let them talk," she replied. A long pause. Then Isabel stepped closer, placing her hand gently on his arm. "You're not the one who changed," she said. "They did, because they're afraid of the idea that something good could happen to someone like you. That kindness might actually matter. That maybe a small life doesn't mean a lesser one." Ethan looked down at her hand, then at the shadowed floor between them. "I've spent so long keeping my head down," he murmured. "I'm not sure I know how to look up anymore." "Then let me remind you how," she said. It was the most direct thing she'd ever said to him. Not an offer, not a plea, a promise. And Ethan, for all his doubts and defenses, felt something shift. Not collapse, not explode, but shift. Later, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky turned to dusk, they sat outside the hangar with mugs of cocoa, watching Noah chase fireflies with a mason jar. The town might be whispering. But for the first time in years, Ethan wasn't listening to it. He was listening to something else. The quiet sound of possibilities just beginning to stir. The jacket hadn't moved in years. It hung on the old hook by the door like a guardian of memory, a tattered monument to a night Ethan barely spoke of, but never quite forgot. He'd meant to toss it once or twice. It was too thin now, the zipper half broken, and the left sleeve still bore a faint oil stain from a Cessna job in 17. But each time he reached for it, something stopped him. Now it was gone. At first he thought it had simply fallen, but when he checked the floor, the bench, the back of the truck, nothing. Not until he stepped into the hangar the next morning did he find it again. Folded neatly, resting on the center work table, and tucked inside the front pocket, as if left there by some poetic ghost, was a cream-colored envelope and a thin slip of paper. Ethan picked it up slowly, as if the fabric itself had weight, not physical, but emotional. He unfolded the note first, just a single sentence written in Isabel's graceful, slanted hand. "This jacket saved me. Let me return the favor." The envelope was heavier than expected. Inside was a plane ticket, Bozeman to Seattle, and beneath it, a folded offer contract on Delacroix Aviation letterhead, formal and concise. His name printed at the top, terms below. But it wasn't the salary that caught him. It wasn't even the relocation stipend or housing clause or the generous education benefit for Noah. It was the final paragraph, handwritten below the typed lines. "You once gave without knowing who I was or what I could become. You helped me fly before I ever left the ground. I want to do the same for you. Not as a debt repaid, but as a life shared. No strings, just hope. I'll be waiting." Ethan read it twice, then again. His fingers traced the edge of the paper, heart thudding so loud it felt like thunder beneath his ribs. He sat down hard on the edge of the bench, the jacket still in his lap. It smelled faintly of her now. Something clean, citrusy, bright. He didn't know how long he sat there before Noah wandered in, hair tousled, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Dad?" Ethan blinked. "Yeah, bud." Noah glanced at the jacket. "That hers?" He nodded. "She's leaving?" "She already left," Ethan said, voice low. "Back to Bozeman." Noah frowned. "Why?" Ethan hesitated. "Because she didn't want to make our lives harder." Noah looked down at his sneakers, scuffing the floor with one toe. "She didn't." Ethan's eyes lifted. "I liked when she was here," Noah added. "You smiled more, and you fixed the old heater without grumbling." A corner of Ethan's mouth tugged up, but the smile didn't last. Noah walked over and picked up the plane ticket, reading it carefully. "Is this for you to visit her?" Ethan nodded. "Could be. Are you going to?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around the hangar, the warped floorboards, the rusting cabinets, the hand-drawn measurements on the wall where he'd tracked Noah's growth each year. It was a home built from necessity, not luxury, a fortress of habit, of safety, but not, he realized, of dreams. "I don't know," he said finally. Noah tilted his head. "What are you scared of?" Ethan looked at him. The boy's question was simple, unguarded, and achingly honest. "I'm scared that I'll lose the life we've built." Noah shrugged. "Then take it with you." And just like that, Ethan felt something crack open. Not break, just shift, like a door unlocking somewhere deep inside. That evening, he sat alone in the living room after Noah had gone to bed. The sky outside was dark, but not threatening. Just calm, still. A late spring silence filled the space between the ticking clock and the soft hum of the fridge. Ethan turned the envelope over in his hands again. He thought about the nights Isabel had spent here, sitting beside him on the workbench, brushing crumbs from her jeans, sipping cocoa, and remembering who she'd once been. He thought about how she looked at him, not like someone who needed saving, but someone who had saved and hadn't even realized it. He stood, walked slowly to the old cedar chest near the front door, and lifted the lid. Inside were remnants of another life. His flight helmet, folded maps, a pair of aviator wings once pinned to a uniform long since packed away. He placed the jacket atop it all, then closed the lid. In the quiet, he whispered, "Thank you." Not to the chest, not to the jacket, but to the man he used to be, and the man he was still becoming. 3 days later, Isabel stood on the tarmac in Bozeman, clipboard in hand, watching engineers inspect a newly delivered Falcon twin engine. The wind tugged gently at the hem of her jacket. Her expression was composed, professional, but her eyes darted to the sky more than once. She didn't see him arrive. Not until she turned to check a fuel manifest and heard a familiar voice say, "Triangle sandwiches still on the menu." Isabel spun. Ethan stood 10 feet away, Noah beside him with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a grin that stretched from one ear to the other. Her breath caught, not from surprise but from something deeper. Relief, gratitude, maybe even a bit of wonder. Ethan walked toward her slowly. "I don't have all the answers," he said, "but I have the right question." "What's that?" she asked. He smiled. "What if we can fly higher together?" The clouds rolled in fast. Not the kind that whispered warning, but the kind that roared. By late afternoon, the sky over Bozeman had darkened to a color that felt bruised. The weather reports buzzed with alert tones. Unexpected front, gale force winds, ground all non-essential flights. Inside the hangar at the Delacroix Aviation Campus, Ethan was on the floor beneath a Gulfstream G150, tightening a hydraulic coupling with slow precision. His sleeves were rolled up, grease smeared across his knuckles, focus razor sharp. But his mind wasn't on the bolts. It was on Isabel. She'd been distant that day. Not cold, just quiet, measured, like she was waiting for something to fall. And maybe in some way he was too. He hadn't asked why she hadn't brought up the contract again, or the job title, or the future. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but he knew one thing. He didn't want to go back to being someone who only watched life happen. Thunder cracked above, long and low, rattling the hangar doors. A voice came through his headset. One of the airstrip coordinators. "Ethan, we've got a King Air landing ahead of schedule. Engine trouble mid-air. It's coming in hot." Ethan was already on his feet. "Runway?" "West side. Delacroix Dispatch is coordinating." He was out the door before the reply ended, sprinting into the wind that had begun to howl across the open tarmac. Rain slapped sideways, sharp as nails, and visibility was dropping by the minute. The twin-prop aircraft appeared through the haze, bucking slightly, tail low. Whoever was flying it was experienced, but the left engine was sputtering erratically, coughing like a dying man. Ethan ran to the edge of the strip just as the wheels touched down. The plane skidded, then corrected, veering slightly before straightening. The moment it stopped, he was at the door. The pilot emerged, shaken but whole. He waved off help, pointing back toward the cabin. "There's a med kit in the hold. It's secured, but it needs checking. Could have come loose during descent." Ethan nodded and climbed in. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and hydraulic fluid. Rain tapped the fuselage like a frantic drummer. He checked the cargo latch, noted the damage, then radioed back for clearance to bring the aircraft into Hangar 3. Just as he stepped back out, a gust of wind caught the door and slammed it against the fuselage. Ethan ducked instinctively, but not fast enough. The edge of the door clipped his shoulder, knocking him hard into the tarmac. The pain bloomed fast and deep, a hot wave slicing down his arm. Someone shouted, and then she was there. Isabel dropped to her knees beside him, soaked through, hair plastered to her face, eyes wide with fear and fury all at once. "Ethan!" "I'm fine," he grunted. "You're not fine." He winced as she helped him to sit. Her hand found the back of his neck, steadying him with more tenderness than he thought he deserved. "You ran out in this storm. What were you thinking?" she demanded, voice cracking. "There was a plane in trouble," he said simply. "What else was I supposed to do?" She shook her head, blinking back rain and something dangerously close to tears. "You could have let someone else, but I didn't," he cut in, "because that's not who I am, and it's not who you are either." She froze. "I know what you're doing," he continued, breathing through the pain. "You've been pulling back, ever since I showed up, ever since people started whispering." She looked away. "I get it," he said. "You built something powerful, beautiful, And now you're afraid I'll be the crack in the glass." Her silence was the only confirmation he needed. "I'm not asking for your empire," he said, voice low. "I'm asking to stand beside the woman who made it, not to take anything, but to build with her." She turned back to him then, the wind swirling around them, rain painting her face with streaks of silver. "You think I'm afraid you'll crack the glass," she whispered, "but the truth is, I'm afraid I'll let it fall entirely. That if I care too much, I'll lose the one thing I fought to keep." "What's that?" she swallowed. "Control." He reached for her hand, muddy and cold but familiar. "We can't control the storm," he said, "but we don't have to face it alone." A long moment passed, then she nodded. And it was the kind of nod that meant yes, to all of it. Later at the urgent care clinic, Ethan sat shirtless on the exam table, shoulder bandaged, muscles sore but intact. Noah burst into the room breathless. "They said you got hit by an airplane door." "Just clipped," Ethan said. "Nothing exciting." "Are you kidding?" Noah grinned. "You got taken out by a King Air. That's like awesome." Isabel followed, dabbing a towel over her soaked blazer. Ethan looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't see the CEO, or the billionaire, or the girl from the snow. He saw his future, and she was still standing beside him. 2 weeks after the storm, the hangar looked different. Not bigger, not newer, but alive. The floor had been cleared of clutter, the walls scrubbed and repainted in fresh coats of white and slate blue. A new tool wall was being installed on the west side, where Ethan had once stacked milk crates full of mismatched bolts. Solar panels were being fitted onto the roof. Fresh cables ran overhead, humming with readiness. Noah ran through the space barefoot, a wrench in one hand and a clipboard in the other, narrating like a field reporter. "And here, future engineers will learn about hydraulic systems, and this is the legendary bench where grilled cheese changed aviation history." Ethan laughed from across the room, shaking his head. "You're going to be a menace when this place opens." Isabel glanced up from her laptop. "Or a marketing director." They stood side by side near the front entrance of what had once been a dusty, half-forgotten maintenance hangar. Now the words "Wings of Hope" gleamed in new paint above the hangar door, flanked by the simple outline of a winged wrench. A new beginning. It had been Isabel's idea, born on a napkin beside Ethan's hospital bed the night after the storm. "We built a program," she'd said, "a real one. Hands-on training for teenagers aging out of the system, kids with nowhere to land. We teach them how to fix what others abandon. Planes, engines, maybe even people." Ethan had stared at her for a long moment. Then he'd said the most dangerous, most exhilarating word he knew. "Yes." And now it was happening. They'd secured the permits. Isabel had fronted the funding from Delacroix's philanthropic branch. Ethan had started building the curriculum. Everything from aircraft anatomy to ethics in repair. "We're not just making mechanics," he'd told the advisory board. "We're making men and women who believe in second chances, who know that being broken doesn't mean being worthless." They had listened, and more importantly, they had believed. That afternoon, a group of 6 teenagers arrived, the first cohort. Some were quiet, others cracked jokes too loudly. A few looked like they didn't believe any of it was real. Ethan recognized that look. He'd worn it once himself. He introduced himself without pretense. "I'm Ethan Cole. This is Noah, my boss." The kids laughed and tension eased just enough. "You're not here because someone felt sorry for you," he said. "You're here because we see something worth building. You, your hands, your minds. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to show up." One of the boys, lanky 16 with sharp eyes and a chip on his shoulder, raised a hand. "What if we mess something up?" Ethan smiled. "Then we fix it. That's what mechanics do." The group dispersed to their assigned stations, supervised by a few experienced volunteers Isabel had personally recruited, including a retired Air Force tech and a former foster kid who now ran his own repair shop in Spokane. Ethan stood back and watched, arms crossed, as tools clanged and laughter echoed. "You made this happen," Isabel said beside him. He shook his head. "We did." She looked up at him. "You ever think we'd get here?" "No," he admitted, "but I stopped expecting the good things to make sense." A quiet pause stretched between them. The sun slipped in through the newly cleaned windows, painting golden squares across the hangar floor. "Come with me." Isabel said suddenly, grabbing his hand. They walked through the rear exit, across the lot, and down a short gravel path that curved behind a line of tall pines. At the end stood a small wooden structure, simple, clean, with 2 chairs on the porch and a sign on the door. Tea and tools. Ethan blinked. Is this a coffee shop? Sort of. Tea, cocoa, muffins. Quiet space. The kids can come here after class, read, talk, breathe. You opened a hangar and a cafe? She smiled. You opened a hangar. I just wanted to give it a heart. Inside, the place smelled of cinnamon and cedar. There were shelves of books, a jar of colorful pens beside a guest journal, and a chalkboard that read, Today's Special, Courage and Cardamom. Ethan sat on the bench outside, taking it all in. For the first time in years, his shoulders relaxed without effort. This wasn't the life I planned, he said quietly. It's better, Isabel replied. He looked at her, really looked, and saw everything she was. The girl in the snow, the woman in the jet, the partner who believed not in fairy tales, but in workable miracles. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled something out. It was the patch again, his old National Guard emblem, now cleaned and sealed in a protective sleeve. I had it framed, she said, for the office wall. Ethan took it in his hand, swallowed hard. Thought you said no altars to the past. Not an altar, she replied, a reminder that people can come home to themselves. He leaned back, the patch resting against his chest. Inside the cafe, Noah was teaching one of the new students how to use the espresso machine, incorrectly by the look of the foam explosion now coating the counter. Ethan laughed. Isabel laughed. And for a moment, laughter was enough. That night as they locked up, Isabel turned to him beneath the wide Montana stars. You still think this town is too small for what you have to give? Ethan pulled her close, their hands entwined. No, he said, because we made it bigger. The ceremony was simple. No red carpet, no grand stage, no choreographed speeches or choreographed applause. Just a breeze that smelled of pine and jet fuel, a handful of mismatched chairs arranged outside the hangar, and a scattering of people who had quietly become something close to family. Noah stood at the makeshift podium, really just a workbench flipped on its side, and tapped the microphone like he'd seen grown-ups do in movies. Testing, he said, then cleared his throat. Hi, my name's Noah Cole, and today I get to say thank you. The wind picked up, tossing his hair, but he stood steady. My dad once told me that flying isn't just about going up. It's about landing right, about knowing how to come home. He looked over at Ethan, eyes shining. But I think sometimes it's about having someone fly with you, someone who sees the sky the way you do. Ethan felt his throat tighten. The crowd, small-town locals, aviation execs, 6 smiling students in matching Wings of Hope jackets, clapped warmly. Isabel stood just behind Noah, a hand on his shoulder, her expression proud and tender. The official ribbon was cut, a strip of red canvas held between 2 old propellers, and the new training center was declared open. Music played from someone's phone hooked to a borrowed speaker. Cocoa and cookies were passed around. Laughter mingled with engine noise, but Ethan barely noticed. His eyes were on the sky. High above, a Delacroix jet drew a lazy circle in the air, a celebratory flyover, piloted by a graduate of Isabel's first mentorship program. Ethan smiled, not just because it was beautiful, but because he knew what it meant. A future was in motion, and it had taken flight from a hangar once filled with nothing more than dust, oil stains, and a man doing his best to stay afloat. Later, after the chairs had been stacked and the last cookie stolen by Noah, Ethan and Isabel found themselves alone at the edge of the runway. The sky had shifted into its evening hues, warm gold slipping into indigo, like someone drawing a soft blanket over the world. They sat on the tailgate of Ethan's old truck, legs swinging, shoulders touching. For a while, neither spoke, just listened, to wind through the trees, to the echo of laughter still lingering in the gravel, to the kind of silence that says, "You're safe now." Finally, Ethan broke it. You ever think about that night? Isabel didn't look at him, but he felt her nod. All the time. I didn't even know your name, he said. You didn't need to, she replied. You saw me anyway. He turned to her, face serious. That night, I wasn't trying to save anyone. I was just doing what felt right. And that's why it mattered, she said softly. Real kindness never looks in the mirror. He looked back toward the hangar, now aglow with soft light from within, laughter trailing from the tea and tools porch. You built something incredible, he said. We built it, she corrected. He smiled. I still feel like that guy in the garage, patching things with duct tape. You are. But now you're teaching others to patch things too. And maybe not everything with duct tape. He chuckled, then fell quiet again. I thought I had to choose, he said after a moment, between being a good father and chasing a future, between holding on and letting go. And I was wrong, he whispered. Turns out, the right person helps you hold while you climb. Isabel reached into her coat and pulled out something small, a silver key on a leather string. What's this? It's to the hangar office, and she said, the final copy. I want you to co-sign the program. Ethan blinked. You're giving me half. I'm giving you yours, she said. This place was born from your story as much as mine. I just followed the trail your kindness lit. He turned the key over in his palm, eyes damp. Then softly, you know, there was a time I thought all I'd ever be was a guy trying to keep the lights on. Isabel leaned her head on his shoulder. Now you're lighting a runway for others. They sat like that as the sky darkened fully, stars blinking into view one by one. And then quietly she asked the question that had lingered between them since the beginning. Ethan, what if we stop being grateful for the past and start writing the future? He turned toward her gently, wholly, and reached for her hand. Only if we write it together. She smiled. Always. The next morning, just as the sun cracked over the eastern ridge, a small group gathered again. Fewer people this time, just the closest ones. Noah stood in the middle, dressed in a crisp button-down and sneakers that didn't quite match. Ethan took Isabel's hand as they stood on the grassy edge of the hangar, and a local pastor cleared his throat with a warm smile. It wasn't a lavish wedding. There were no tuxedos, no orchestra, no paparazzi. But there was light. There was laughter. There was truth. And when Isabel Delacroix said I do to the mechanic who once gave her his only jacket in a snowstorm, the wind picked up softly, lifting her veil like a whisper of the past being let go. The promise they'd made wasn't spoken in gold or ink. It had been written long ago, in frost and fire, in silence and kindness. A promise to keep showing up, to keep repairing what the world said was broken, to fly together, no matter what came. Above them, a lone jet traced a perfect arc in the sky, and beneath it, a family stood in the golden morning, smiling, steady, and finally home. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? It's always heartwarming to see how far these stories travel and how kindness connects us across the globe. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to our channel for more real human stories that inspire hope, healing, and love. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Your support means the world. And we hope this story reminded you, as it did us, that even the smallest act of kindness